Hello and welcome to A Baker's Passion. I'm Ray Madursky and today I'm going to demonstrate how to make a really easy version of puff pastry. There are many easy versions: Rapid, Blitz, German. They have all different names, methods for making puff pastry. And this is pretty much similar to all the other methods that you might come across. The thing that's unique here though is that I use heavy cream instead of water in making the dough. So we just cut butter, very cold butter, into big chunks, put it into some bread flour, toss it to get it coated. Then we just lightly press rather than crumbling and really making a fine sandy coarse mixture with the flour and the butter. And then we just start putting the cream into the mixture, forming it by hand into a rectangle and then starting to roll it out. And by the second roll, we really have what begins to, rolling and turning, we really have what begins to look like pretty good puff pastry. The heavy cream really makes just this wonderful, buttery, melt in your mouth kind of pastry. It's just amazing. And I do know how to make, and I used to make the classic puff pastry where we make a détrempé dough, then we incorporate a brick of butter into that dough, and then you do all the rolling and turning and things. This technique though is so easy. Within 5 or 10 minutes you've got dough with 2 turns going. So it's really easy and it's magnificent. Now you don't get quite the rise in your puff pastry that you do when you make the classic version. But for most things, I use it for TVideo, for d'artois. I use it as a crust for certain tarts that I make. It's absolutely perfect for that. I use it for making Napoleon, the Napoleon cake and things. You can't beat it. And I learned this technique essentially when I was in France in 1980. Some people started doing it, and I came home and put together my own formula. It's exactly the same formula that I've been using all these years, but then I haven't heard anyone doing it this way ever since. So I want to share this with you because I think it's a really great, easy, wonderful way to make puff pastry. I don't make a 1 pound batch because for most people, and in most of my own kitchens, except for my current one, it wasn't practical to make a 1 pound batch and to have large enough space to roll that out. So I always make a half batch. So it's 9 ounces, in this case, of bread flour, 2 tablespoons of sugar, because I'm going to use this to do some sweet things. If you want to use it for savory things, do not put the sugar in. Some salt, butter and heavy cream, and that's it. So why don't we get started? Okay, so into the bowl I've weighed 9 ounces of bread flour. I've put in 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt and 2 tablespoons of sugar. And I just use a whisk, just blend everything together. That's all you have to do. You could actually use your fingers if you don't want to dirty the whisk. It's up to you. Now the salt might sound like it's a little bit much, but it's actually not. It's actually about a 1/4 of a teaspoon less than we would use if we were making bread. And it is important that you put 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt into the dough, because if you don't, it can be very flat tasting. So it really enhances the flavor, and it's a safe amount of salt if it sounds like a lot to you. Okay, so you can see I've taken very cold butter and cut it into fairly large chunks. You don't have to be perfectly even when you're cutting it. And I just throw them into the flour mixture. And then what I like to do is just lightly toss them. Just use your fingertips, break all the pieces apart, and let all of the butter get a nice light coating of the flour. So that's all we have to do here. Now once all of the butter is lightly coated, just press the butter lightly. I'm not crumbling it, I'm just pressing it to start breaking it up. Use only your fingertips as you're doing this because we don't want the butter. It's really important that it not melt, okay? So now, just coarsely pushing the butter into big leaves, as it were. Now what I'm going to do is take heavy whipping cream, that's 1 cup and a half, and we put it in, and then we're just going to toss it with our hands to bring everything together. Okay, so now just put your fingers in. It's nice and cold, and you just want to bring everything together, and you're going to be really shocked at how much this does not look like a puff pastry or any kind of dough at all. Hardly. It looks almost like a batter at this point. Very thick kind of scone or a biscuit batter. But that's just exactly how it should look. Now I like to use a bowl scraper at this point just to help, because when we turn everything out, we really want to get everything out of the bowl. Okay, so the next thing to do, and I'm going to work exactly as I do this when I'm doing it with no one watching me, because I want you to see that you just keep moving quickly and the whole thing comes together really quickly. Flour your work surface. Then just turn this pile of dough that's in the bowl right out onto your work surface. Thing though is to be sure that you scrape every last bit out of the bowl and off of your hands, etc. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is pretty much just press by hand at this point. The mass of dough into a rectangle. It's really nice and cold, and that is exactly what I want. I just want to go back here and get my scraper. Keep your scraper handy. I actually put it back with the bowl, but you want to keep it handy because initially your hands are going to be covered with the pasty dough. Now also have ready your dry pastry brush. Now you can see I formed an approximate rectangle. Now I always just scrape my hands like so, and then I'm going to actually start rolling the dough out and doing the folding and turning. Okay, so use your rolling pin. Pretty much keep the dough approximately in the shape of a rectangle. Now the dough is really coarse and rough, and you're going to see it cracking like this. This is all okay at this point. Now what I am trying to do is get the dough about, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch thick. Okay, now it's very rough, but now we want to start getting excess flour off it. So do use your pastry brush at this point. The first 2 turns, I do what are called double turns. And usually when we fold puff pastry, we fold it like a business letter. Bottom half, top third, excuse me, down over the center, and the bottom third up over, and then we turn the whole package. This, though, we're doing kind of a, each 1/4 of the dough is going in, meeting in the center. And again, we want to really kind of get everything as neat as we possibly can. Any big chunks of butter and flour fall, just put them right on to the dough. Now we're going to fold it again. So what we have and it's breaking apart a little bit here, so we're just going to use a little bit of extra flour to give it some stability. Okay, so what we have is a piece of dough that has 2 layers, and then we double that over, so there are 4 layers of dough here. Now you hear this word turn, and here's what we do to turn it. We just give it a 1/4 turn. Now we start rolling again. And make sure you're pretty generous with your flour, because you could see everything's going to be sticky and coming apart, and it's okay at this point. That's how this dough kind of works. Most of your rapid puff pastry techniques tend to look like this early on. But as you can see now, we're starting to get the visual appearance of actually a decent dough. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do the double turn right now. We're going to fold 1/4 in to the center and the next 1/4 in. And then we're going to fold the whole thing over on itself. Now there's a piece of dough, I'm just going to throw it inside. Now, lightly flour the dough, and what we're going to do now is actually take this very coarse dough at this point, wrap it in some plastic wrap, and give it a really good ½ hour to 1 hour, but not much more than an hour rest. Then we'll do the next 2 turns. Now it is important that you keep the dough at this point wrapped so it doesn't dry out. because we want that moisture. That moisture from the heavy cream in this case, and some from the water that's in the butter, is important for making the final dough puff up and separate. Steam forms, the butter melts, tenderizes the layers of dough, and then the steam pushes things up and apart. Alright, so first 2 turns are done. Now what I do is I put my wrapped dough onto a half sheet pan, and I'll put it in the refrigerator to chill for at least a half hour.